Good morning and welcome to the Irving-Las Colinas Changemakers series, Race Relations Discussion. I'm Beth Bowman and have the privilege of serving as the President and CEO of your five-star Greater Irving-Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce and the Irving Economic Development Partnership. During these unprecedented times, our country is experiencing the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee at the Irving-Las Colinas Chamber has been focused on outlining critical conversations, impactful initiatives, and creating change in our community to ensure inclusivity for everyone. This Changemaker series is meant to serve as a safe space and provide a platform for stakeholders and changemakers to share their efforts and their views. Over the course of several programs as part of the series, you will hear from elected officials, community leaders, and business executives discussing best business practices, governmental policies, education inclusivity initiatives, as well as mental health, just to name a few. At this time, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's discussion. One of my bosses who serves on our board of directors, Felicia Gadsden, is the founder and managing director of the Gadsden Group, which is a diversity and inclusion consulting firm. She's an active member in our organization, and as I shared earlier, serves on our board of directors and our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. At this time, I want to turn the program over to Director Johnson. Thank you so much for being with us this morning and moderating this impactful conversation.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction, Chamber President Bowman, and good morning to everyone. Just a quick reminder, if anyone has any questions for our panelists, please feel free to submit them into the Q&A function. So let's get started. This morning's event is the first in a series of the Irving-Las Colinas Chamber of Commerce's Changemaker series. And it is my pleasure to introduce our very esteemed guest and panelists for this morning's conversation on race relations, diversity, equity, and inclusion in our community. Our first panelist is Neha Kunte, CEO and owner of MNK Infotech, Chief Jeff Spivey, Irving Police Department, and Dennis Webb, pastor and City of Irving council member. I'd like to start out by asking each of the panelists to take about a minute and introduce yourself. Neha, let's start with you.
Good morning, Felicia, and good morning to everybody. It is my pleasure and honor to be here as a guest on the very first Changemaker series. I really feel privileged. Again, my name is Neha Kunte, and I'm owner of MNK Infotech, Irving-based company. We have been in Irving since 2004. We are an IT consulting company providing IT staffing, software development, and gamification of training.
Thank you so much. Welcome. Chief Spivey.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Spivey. I'm the Chief of Police for the City of Irving. I've been employed with the city for almost 34 years now and have been the Chief of Police since 2017. It's my honor to be here to discuss this topic, especially from a policing perspective, given all that's going on in the United States today.
Thank you so much. We're so glad you're here. And Councilman Webb.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Dennis Webb, and I am a 62-year-old, married for 38 years with 3 kids and 8 grandkids. I'm a retired firefighter from the city of Grand Prairie after 30 years of service there. And I'm a 58-year resident of the same community, which is called Bear Creek Community here in Irving, Texas. I'm the founder and I'm the current pastor of the Bear Creek Community Church here in Irving. And also, I was elected to the city council in 2011. And I served a full 3-year term, which I limited out, but I'm a constitutional holdover because the elections were delayed until November. And so, again, I'm happy to be part of this panel to talk about the diversity here in our city and in our country.
Excellent. Well, thank you again to each and every one of you. So as noted previously, The conversation today is focused on race relations. Each of you are serving on this panel as a change maker and as a leader in our community. Can you start out by sharing a personal story, either positive or negative, that you have experienced related to race relations? Councilman Weld, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you. I pondered, and thought about this, and most of my experiences have been good experiences, but I do remember as our church, we minister to the homeless a lot, but every now and then we'll have someone ask, "Can I come to your church?" And it's almost, and they're usually Caucasians, and they'll ask, do you allow white people to your church, in your church? And I go, sure. But that made me realize that there's still this mindset that there's this division, between, the races, even when it comes to the houses of worship. So that got me really thinking about, how to make sure that I really embrace, or get the word out that, yeah, we are a welcoming church, and we want to include everybody in our service. So I thought that was like in 2020, that just kind of, was surprising to me.
Okay, thank you. Neha?
Sure. Fortunately, I have come across, places and events and occasions where I have been asked very curiously about personally my race and what is that I worship. So I extremely take the privilege to give them, explanation and education about what it is. And when they hear the other side of the story, I think we get very positive response. And I can say that with one of my very true story and experience, very much here in Irving. It was, in fact, 10 years ago, I attended one of the Irving's Newsmaker event, and where I was honored. I met with the fabulous lady there, and she actually gave me an opportunity, who herself is a huge advocate, Christina Winters. She actually was the very much, navigator for the diversity and inclusion. And we started the Irving International Women's Consortium, where we really encouraged every single international. And thanks to the diverse zip code that we have and where we are, we took the full privilege of educating people with different cultures and diversity and embrace them.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. And just, something very quickly that the Councilman Weld had mentioned, that, this invitation that you had extended in just recently in 2020. And so it's just, it's really interesting if you think about it, one may assume that inclusivity exists, and it's just not something that, somebody can just automatically assume that it's there. And so, so again, we certainly have to always do our part to make certain that our actions and what we're doing are inclusive by nature. So that's fantastic. And Chief Spivey?
So as I thought about this question, I really wanted to bring it back to a policing perspective and share with you some of my experiences. And I think the experiences of many police officers in today's times is oftentimes when I would stop, when I was a police officer working the streets, I would stop a motorist for a traffic violation. If that motorist was African-American, many times what I would get is, "You're only stopping me because I'm black." And that used to really offend me and frustrate me, because that wasn't the motive behind the traffic stop. And it took many years for me to come to realize, and what I try to impart upon our young police officers, is that response isn't meant to at you be as a personal attack. That response is coming from someone who's that is their perception. It's not a defensive mechanism. That is their perception, because that's been their reality many times and throughout their life, or it has been shared with them from family members or friends. And I think it's important for policing and police officers to recognize that that is an experience and that is a reality, and not to take it so personally. And something that I've worked really hard on myself and to try to instill upon the men and women of the Irving Police Department is, to accept that for what it is, not a personal attack, but an expression of a very real experience that person may have had in the past.
Absolutely. And, just to add something to that, Chief, just like you said, a person's a frame of reference and how they perceive things, certainly that is what directly influences their narrative, right? How I respond to a situation is based solely upon my experiences, what I've been exposed to, what I've seen, what I've been taught, what I've learned. And so just to further that conversation and the points that you were making, Chief Spivey, this question is for you. Many of the protests that we have seen were initiated by the death of Mr. George Floyd. As Chief Law Enforcement Officer, have you implemented any changes to your department's program, starting from initial hiring processes, retraining law enforcement officers, unconscious bias or sensitivity training, or de-escalation when it comes to force?
Felicia, I'm very fortunate in that when I took over as chief of police in 2017, many of the things that we were doing as an organization were already part of our culture at the Irving Police Department. In 2016, we started teaching implicit bias training to every one of our employees, and I continue to do that where I personally teach that training to every recruit, every new police officer we hire that comes through the academy. They get implicit bias training.
Mm-hmm.
We've taught de-escalation for many, many years, and not just a class on de-escalation. We weave de-escalation into all of the things that we talk about when we're doing our defensive tactics training, when we're doing use of force discussions, when we're on the range talking about deadly force. We're weaving de-escalation through that conversation so that it isn't just sitting in the classroom hearing about de-escalation. It's becoming part of how we do all of our work. Just sitting learning isn't going to necessarily be effective in the heat of a moment under a stressful situation. But if you weave that into your training, then it becomes second nature, and you tend to be able to rely on that more effectively. Some of the changes, though, that coming out of the protests specifically, we've always had a duty to intervene in our policies, something that we are very proud of and something we take very seriously. However, it wasn't specifically spelled out in the policy. There wasn't that language of duty to intervene. We talked about the protection of all people and their rights. So we went in and we specifically added that language so that there was clarity for our employees to understand their role if they were to see a fellow employee doing something that they felt was wrong or was over the line. We also added language where we render aid to victims of crime. And not just victims, but if we've been involved in a use of force situation or we've had to use deadly force against someone, that as soon as that is safe to do so, we're to then immediately start rendering aid to that person, even though that person had just tried to hurt or kill us. And then the other change coming out of the George Floyd protest is we've always banned chokeholds, but we have been an agency that taught and used the lateral vascular neck restraint. And while it's very different in its application, I think to people who see that who aren't trained, it looks the same. I think anytime you put an arm around a neck, everyone considers that a chokehold, even though there are some differences. But recognizing the outcry from that, we've now moved away from and prohibited the use of neck restraints of any kind. And so I think that brings us more in line to what the public expects from their police department. I think it still allows us to do our job safely. It allows our employees to be effective in how they handle situations, but does so under this new expectation that our community has on us.
Absolutely. I love what you said, and I love the term that you use, DNA. I actually use that quite often in my training opportunities whenever I'm consulting with different organizations, conducting workshops. And when we talk about inclusion, it should be a part, right? A part of what you do. It should be a part of your DNA. And I always use the example that if I were to conduct an autopsy on your organization, I should be able to see DNA within there, right? It should be a part of the fabric of your organization. I also liked what you said about bystander responsibilities, and when we are, I believe it's everybody's responsibility to certainly do their part to build a more inclusive society, and each of us play a role. We can't just leave it to leaders in the community or leaders on the political stage, although they certainly have responsibilities, but we all do. And there's something that each and every one of us can do to make that happen. So moving on, just thinking about the personal experiences that each of our panelists have shared this morning, knowing what we know, hearing what we've heard, tell us a little bit about what current initiatives are in place at the local level and or in your respective organizations that identify with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And also, if you would, tell us a little bit about what data and metrics that you might have in place that ensures that these initiatives will continue and are making progress. And I'd like to start with Councilman Webb to answer that question. Again, what current initiatives are in place at the local level, and as well as what those programs are doing to identify with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Councilman Webb.
Okay, thank you. Of course, the city of Irving being a very diverse city itself, but the city of Irving has always focused on diversity, and in our city especially, when we talk about diversity and inclusion, there is a diversity and inclusion statement. It's on the city's intranet website, and that's a part of the website that the employees can go to, but also I think it may be on the public website. If not, I can check, or we can check with our Human Resource Department to see where it can be found, but there is a diversity statement. Also, there was a comprehensive review of the city's policies to ensure that diversity, inclusion, and equity are accounted for. And then also one of the things that I am very familiar with is that the city is always focused on minority recruitment. Matter of fact, the city has used a website called Handshake and .com. And what it does, it sends job notifications to various diverse colleges throughout the country, but also they participated in the NAACP job fairs. I know the fire department has recruited, did some recruitment in colleges such as Jarvis College and Prairie View. And then also they put flyers out into some journals in Houston trying to recruit minorities. They also recruited through the military at Fort Hood. So the city has always included diversity as part of its mission. Also, the city of Irving has what's called a Irving 360 Academy. And it's a civic academy whereby it's an 11-week program whereby citizens can learn all of the ins and outs of the operations of the city. And to date, I think if my record, participants are 90 graduates who've grown through that program, and there's plans to continue to expand that program so that these graduates can also be part of focus groups. The class makeup is always very diverse, and it's by design to ensure that we touch every area of our city, so we have people from every ethnic background as part of our city. Also, we have what's called a WIN program, and it is working for Irving neighborhoods, and it is part of our Irving Neighborhood Association and Diversity Program, whereby we have a department that focuses on assisting neighborhood associations and also make sure that those neighborhood associations are able to actively serve their diverse communities. So I can go on and on and on about the city's diversity, but we also are charting this. You mentioned about the data matrix, and we have a strategic plan, and as part of our human resources communications business plan that's reviewed by the city manager and the city council to ensure that we are charting. We just don't want to say we do this. We want to have proof. When it comes to a lot of our procurement for businesses and for contracts, we have a minority procurement program where we have a goal that just about all of the programs that we as a city led has, I think it's like about 26% minority contractors. So that's to make sure that we include not only minorities, but women. Women are considered minorities too. So we'll make sure that some of the women contractors get some of the city's funding. But we are, as a city, and I'm proud to say, being in this city as long as I have been and been involved at the city level for a good 20 years, I can see that we are focused on making sure that we are inclusive.
Well, Councilman Webb, that is very impressive. And I will tell you, I was not personally aware of many of these programs. And this is very impressive. This is fantastic. And I love what you said with regard to your metrics. You definitely sounds like you've got some terrific programs in place that's measuring that. I learned a long time ago in my corporate experience that what gets measured gets done. And so it's very important to make certain that you are able to ladder your efforts up against a system or a process that is going to measure the effectiveness as well as the impact of your efforts. I'm sorry, was there something else you wanted to say?
No, that's it.
Okay. Neha, why don't you tell us about your efforts there at MNK Infotech?
Absolutely. And, to start with, we are a small company. We are, in fact, 50% or more in diversity. Being said that, it is the initiative that we have taken, not because of any mandate by the government or the private entities. It's just that we truly believe that the most organic way of any company's growth is being diverse and inclusive. And I know people usually tend to use that term together, but honestly, it has a deep meaning individually, and it's not a synonyms. When you're looking at a diversity, you're also looking at an inclusion. That means you're asking or giving advantages or privileges to some of the diverse population to be more inclusive and give them a growth path. And as you said, Felicia, I was really not aware of all these programs that Councilman mentioned. Being in Irving, I'm sorry, there's probably these information needs to be more available, especially for small businesses and minority businesses. Coming back to the three solid components that we serve on in the company at MNK Infotech is purpose, process, and people. If you have aligned all these three things, then it is pretty much under the diversity and inclusion equity umbrella. It's much convenient and easy for us to incorporate those in each of the places and look at the growth. I mean, it's just so natural that we definitely tend to have more diversity in our offerings. We make sure that we, as any other businesses, we have several different platforms that we utilize and give opportunities to minority women of all races, of all colors. We purely go by their performances, to be very honest with you. And I think that gives us a tremendous courage to move forward.
Wonderful. Chief, did you have anything you wanted to add with regard to current initiatives in addition to what you've already shared with us earlier?
So absolutely. I spoke about the implicit bias training that all of our employees go through. But when we look at the makeup of the Irving Police Department, it looks very much like me. And that's because in the 1980s, our community looked very much like me. And so as we hired police officers, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, when we had a large growth that occurred within the city, most of the people that we hired were white males. What we've focused on certainly in the last 10 years, and more specifically since I've taken over as chief, is to ensure that we're recruiting and focusing our hiring efforts on people who look like our community. And so the efforts that we put forth to creating a diverse workforce, has to be done through the recruiting stage. We're governed by Chapter 143 of the Local Government Code, which is civil service. And so it lays out at the state level the steps that we have to go through in order to hire, and how we go about hiring people. So that tends to create some hurdles for us as we go through the hiring process to make sure that we are as diverse as the population of our city. But we try to overcome that with who we recruit. The other thing that I would like to mention as we talk about diversity and inclusion is 2 years ago, I added an LGBTQ liaison. He's a police officer who is openly gay, and he interacts with the LGBTQ community and develops that relationship, something that we had been lacking for a number of years, but I think has really opened up some conversations with our community and started developing some trust between the police and the LGBTQ community that I think will pay dividends in the long run.
Chief, that's absolutely fantastic. And certainly, you certainly know, as evidenced by your efforts in terms of what you've just described, is that communities, certainly the law enforcement should reflect the communities that they serve and mirror the communities that they serve. So excellent, in terms of the programs and what you're doing. And just something very quickly, Neha, back to what you had said in terms of the steps that you have been taking there in your company. Certainly diversity and inclusion certainly spurs innovation. And so one of the things that I think is also very important that we need to remember is that when we talk about diversity, we have to look at it and in a sense of it being, wider than just race and gender, right? If there are people that are still thinking that diversity and inclusion is just about, Black people or white people or men and women, I always ask those people to come to the front of the class in my training classes, because it's certainly a lot more than that. And, and certainly, again, when you have more people in the room that are thinking differently, instead of having one or two ways that you may approach a problem to solve, you'll have 30 or 40. I'm oftentimes reminded of a quote by General Patton when he said that if everyone in the room is thinking the same, then someone's not thinking at all. And so thank you both for your responses on that. Chief Spivey, I have received a question in the Q&A function that I'd like to present to you. I live in Irving, Texas, and want to ask actually all of the panelists to talk about the rights and responsibilities of police and citizens in their conduct when they cross paths in an official law enforcement setting. Both may remember their rights, but forget their responsibilities. Chief Spivey, I'm going to pose that question to you.
So I think from the police perspective, the responsibility that my employees have are to treat people with dignity and respect. We have a culture here that is centered around procedural justice, and procedural justice talks about the process in which to reach a decision is just as important, and sometimes even more important, than the ultimate outcome of that decision. And so as we conduct ourselves in these types of encounters, what our citizens should see from our police officers is that they're being treated with respect first and foremost. That we are transparent with our motives, that you don't have to wonder why the encounter is happening, or you don't have to wonder why the actions being taken are being taken. That should be explained. We should be transparent in our motives. We should also give the other party a voice. It's not just us talking down to you or talking to you or explaining to you what's going to happen. We want to hear from you. We want your input. What I do tell my police officers, though, is this isn't an opportunity where you allow a violator to try to talk themselves out of a ticket or try to talk themselves out of going to jail, but we do want to hear your side of the story. And then the last pillar of procedural justice has to do with fairness. We want that equity in the way we treat people, whether you're the CEO of a corporation in Las Colinas or you're a day laborer that we encounter, you're going to be treated the same across the board. I think those are the responsibilities that our citizens should see when they encounter a police officer. Now, I think our citizens should also have some responsibilities in that interaction.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost is obey the law, and you really lessen the chance that you encounter a police officer. But that's not always going to be the case. But when you do encounter a police officer, I think your responsibility is to do what the police officer asks you to do, to try to be compliant. If you feel like you're being targeted, if you feel like the police officer is being unprofessional, there are steps that you can take that will initiate an investigation of that employee. You can ask to see that officer's supervisor. You can call down or go to our website and file a complaint with our professional standards division. And we'll investigate the conduct of that police officer. But I think if you're just looking from a responsibility standpoint, your responsibility is to be law-abiding, to be as compliant as you can be. And then if you feel like there was some unjust treatment, to make sure that you file that complaint with us so that we can investigate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much. And I love what you said in terms of, you know, all of our citizens certainly having a voice. And just to further on that, certainly every person does have a voice, and that voice deserves to be heard. I also like what you said in terms of, you know, the equality and the equity, as many of the, I know from the chamber have heard me say before, one of the best descriptors that I've heard about that, and I reference this quite often, is that equality is essentially giving everyone a shoe, whereas equity is giving everyone a shoe that fits, right? And so we want to make certain that that what we are doing is that we, you know, in our everyday efforts to be inclusive, whether it's in our offices, in our businesses, in our communities, in our organizations, in our homes, you know, we certainly want to make certain that that fairness and equity is there. I do have another question from the chat. Are there any minority organizations that have recently approached you, the panelists, since Mr. George Floyd's activism, or the activism that has resulted as a result of his death, demanding changes in the city, the police department, or directly amongst small businesses? And again, that question is really focused to all of our panelists. Again, are there any minority organizations that have recently approached you demanding changes in the city, the police department, or directly to our small businesses? Councilman Webb, why don't you start from the city's perspective?
I know we've gotten a lot of emails from citizens. You know, some of them are demanding change, some of them are demanding defunding the police department. I haven't personally had any organization approach me. I'm not sure, you know, about, you know, the rest of the council members or the city at large, but there is this push toward, since the George Floyd killing, you know, to reform our, you know, police departments and everything. But one thing I didn't mention earlier is that after the murder of George Floyd, you know, that the city released and committed to 3 pledges. And one of those pledges were to develop a citywide diversity and inclusion initiative, and which is different from the statement. This initiative is something that is in the early stages right now, and they plan to kick it off officially in the fall of this year. And also from that, the training and communication and accountability from our city is to maintain, you know, a high policing standards. You know, like the chief, you know, we've got a great police department. I got a lot of confidence in Chief Spivey, and but, you know, we can always raise the level of our standards. And so I'm confident that he's going to do that. Also, let me just kind of chime in what Chief Spivey said about your previous question about, you know, the conduct of citizens and police officers. I held a event last Wednesday night at my church called Law Enforcement and Youth. And what it was I had a panel of law enforcement officials, Chief Spivey was included, and I had about 6 youth, and they sat and they discussed, and those youth were able to ask any questions of the police and the law enforcement officers that they want to ask. So I would encourage anybody. It was about a hour and 45-minute discussion, very informative. A lot of the questions maybe that some of the people will have about rights were addressed because some of the kids asked what are their rights. So they can go to the Bear Creek Church Facebook page, and they can actually view that discussion from last Wednesday night.
That's fantastic. And just one other question to you, Councilman Webb. Someone is asking the question, how can a local LGBT small business owner get involved in the citywide initiative that you just mentioned? Excellent question.
Matter of fact, if they, and I have this somewhere here in my notes, if there's an email address that they can email. I'm gonna give this email address, and if they want to participate, in this process, they can email info at cityofirving.org. And so residents and community members, who'd like to participate in that process are encouraged to email that address and tell them they want to participate.
Okay, wonderful. And we'll make certain too, within the recap of this morning's conversation, that we'll make certain that that email address is included.
Okay.
Okay, and just for clarification, someone did also ask the question, could someone speak to the diversity committee implemented by Mayor Stouffer? That is the program that you're referencing, is that correct? Or is that a different program?
It's probably going to be something different.
Okay, I just wanted to be mindful of asking that question. So
yeah, because all the information that I just disseminated to you, that's actually from the staff perspective. I'm not sure about the mayor. It may be the same, but but not specifically knowing what the mayor implemented. I'm not sure.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Well, incredible examples of diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, not only from our business community, from the city, and certainly from our law enforcement community rather. So a question that I want to pose to all of our panelists, how can our leadership, and more specifically in your respective roles, help manage the expectations of diversity, equity, and inclusion across the extremely diverse Irving-Las community, Las Colinas community, and North Texas? Again, how can our leadership, and more specifically in your respective roles, help manage the expectations? And to the point of our conversation this morning on race relations, I believe that there has been an enhanced level of expectation from our business leaders. So again, what can we expect from you in your respective roles to help manage those expectations? Nihal, let's start with you.
Absolutely. And I think there are twofold to this answer. One is at a personal level and also on the business front. I personally feel that, I serve on the other Asian Chamber of Texas as well, and we have done very successful, representation for the allyship, how to be a good ally, with the current situation, and also xenophobia. With the hate and wash the hate, sort of the moment that happened mostly in New York and LA. So we kind of echoed that over here. We really got positive responses and feedback from those webinars. I think on a company level, we are definitely making sure that we include the as possible as we can. As mentioned, we're a small company, and also we struggle. I feel there's a lot that needs to be done in our city as well. I mean, definitely there's a huge cultural diversity, but are we bringing that diversity and inclusion in, in our businesses, in procurement and purchasing? If we are having more so, more visibility to all these platforms and events that are happening, and have more participation of diversity. We are offering free internships and free training for anybody and everybody who is wanting to make the most of this time and utilize that to upgrade themselves in the workforce. So towards contributing to the workforce development, I think. And we will be more than happy to collaborate with the chamber, with the city, and even participation of large organization. I think it's a socio-economic responsibility for all of us to be together and do something collectively, not like solo and individually.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. Please make that information available to our friends at the chamber. And, and to your point, there's certainly a lot of support that our small business community could certainly benefit from. Chief Spivey, again, how can our leadership and more specifically in your leadership role help manage the expectations of diversity, equity, and inclusion across Irving and greater North Texas?
What I consistently tell people when I'm out in the community, when they ask how they can help, is one, be an ambassador for the Irving Police Department. If you like what we're doing, if you get involved with what we're doing, you need to ensure that your circle of influence understands that, and you are constantly promoting the great things that are happening in the city of Irving and with the Irving Police Department. Get involved. We offer a number of different opportunities for you to be involved in what goes on at the Irving Police Department. I would encourage anyone who hasn't been through the Citizens Police Academy to do so. We offer 4 each year, 2 in English and 2 in Spanish. And it's a great way to understand at a deeper level what the Irving Police Department and what being an Irving police officer is all about. That then gives you that base of knowledge to go out and promote what's going on in Irving and be able to answer those questions that either your employees or your employer or your circle of friends and family pose to you, because there's a lot of conversations that are happening that I'm not able to address. But when you understand from the Irving Police perspective what's going on, what our goals are, what we're trying to accomplish, you can then be that ambassador, that mouthpiece for us, and help spread that message. And then, the last thing I would include is be the change that you want to see. We do have this incredibly diverse community, but only a certain number of our community members actually want to be involved in the policing profession. And the best way that you can affect change is to become part of that organization and change an organization from within. And so if you have family members, if you have children who are looking for what opportunities exist, especially in today's job market, we're always going to be hiring police officers. We're always going to be hiring detention and 911 communication staff. So getting involved from an employment level and then changing an organization from within, bringing your own diversity, bringing your own experiences, just enhances our ability to deliver services to our community.
Absolutely, well said. And to your point, perspective is critical, and certainly it benefits the community as a whole when all of our citizens' perspective is widened, right? When we have an increase, a frame of reference, so that we are making decisions, based on not just one narrow perspective or one narrow way of thinking. Councilman Webb, anything you want to say again on that question with regard to managing expectations of diversity, equity, and inclusion across our city and greater North Texas?
Yeah, and I think it begins at the top levels of leadership with the mayor and the council being approachable, responding to people. We get emails from people, and I try to respond to, every email that I get, because, if a person think it's important enough to send me an email, then whatever it is they send me an email for is important to them, and I just can't ignore it. So I try to make sure that I let everybody know, regardless of, your race or your ethnicity, or even your sexual orientation, you can call me or you can email me, and I'm going to try to respond. So I think that's number one. Number two, I think, we have to develop a heart where we work with everybody. We may not all agree with one another. We may have different, opinions or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's all about the city of Irving. and not about any, one individual's individual agenda. And so I think when we can do that, we can really be very inclusive. And then we just got to listen to everybody. Everybody don't always think the same. I learned that being a pastor, that everybody don't think the same, and so I've got to at least, respect people enough to listen to them, and then finally, I would encourage the citizens who want to get involved with the city. We have what we call boards and commissions, and we have an opportunity for citizens to actually sit on these advisory boards. And just to name a few, we got like the Park Board, the Museum Board, our Planning and Zoning Commission, Housing and Human Service Board, Youth Action Council, Building Standards Commission. And, these are positions that citizens themselves can sit on. And all they have to do is go on the city's website and look up boards and commissions. And there's just a list and a description of what that committee or commission does. And then they fill out an application. And then in November, the council appoint people to these positions to serve for 2 years, whatever. I began my, if you want to say, kind of career here on the Planning and Zoning Commission, and then I went from the Planning and Zoning Commission after about 8 years, and then I ran for City Council, and it was on the Planning and Zoning Commission that I really learned the city. So I would encourage people, if you got time that you want to give, a lot of your skills that you have, you can, your diversity brings a lot of, things to the table. So that's one way that that you can get involved. And so, Irving is a global city, and we've got one of the most diverse zip codes in the country, 75038. Even more diverse in San Francisco and New York. And that says something about our city.
Yes, it does.
You got DFW that occupies a part of our city. So we want everybody's diversity to come to the table and show us how we can make Irving, a more diverse and.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilman Webb. And I do have one question that has been submitted specifically for Chief Spivey and for Neha. If either of you have been approached recently by minority groups demanding change.
So for me, from the Chief of Police perspective, I've not been approached by any specific groups. We have a great relationship here in the city of Irving with the Irving Carrollton local branch of the NAACP. Me and President Grimes on a regular basis have conversations. So there wouldn't be anything from that group. Like Councilman Webb, I've received literally thousands of emails from citizens, not all from the city of Irving, demanding change. There's a group out there, 8 Can't Wait, and we've addressed those 8 issues that they brought up. If you go to our social media sites, our Facebook page, our Twitter, we specifically address those 8 instances and how the Irving Police Department is living up to that request for change. And then also the defund the police movement certainly has been front and foremost on my email list of emails that I get from our residents, and would love to have a conversation about what that looks like and what that would mean, but that would take up a whole Changemaker series all on its own. But I think it's a conversation worth having, and people need to truly understand what that means and what that would entail if we were to embark upon that.
Absolutely. Well, just remember, Chief, this is our first. So as we had mentioned before, we definitely see this Changemaker series continuing. Neha?
Honestly, I haven't personally received any request, demanding change. But as a small business owner, I myself is asking for a change. There is actually, it's a difficult time, and more so we are looking at this unbelievable pandemic that has hit the whole world. If we can do anything for diverse and small businesses, it's my personal request to whoever is listening on this panel right now to really own that responsibility and help those businesses who are suffering. We know there are so many businesses who are suffering right now and on the verge of closing. Some of them have already closed. So as a citizen, I am myself appealing for that. And I would be more than happy to partner with anybody who is willing to put a request to me.
Absolutely. Neha, thank you. As we approach the end of our phenomenal conversation this morning, our last question to our panelists is, how can we ensure our community, both residential and business, is an open and inclusive city, inspiring change, growth, and a prosperous economy, as well as what can we do, each of us, what can we do to help you implement that change? Again, we are honing in on the end of our hour today, so I would ask that you make your comments brief. But again, how can we ensure our community, both residential and business, is an open and inclusive city, inspiring change, growth, and a prosperous economy? And what can we do? Councilman Webb, I'll start with you, then Neha, and then we'll end with Chief Spivey. Councilman Webb?
Yeah, I'll keep this simple and short. You know, again, it gets back to the leadership at the top has got to not only have that as your like words or mission statement, we got to visibly promote that. They got to hear it in our, campaign speeches. They got to hear it in our council chambers. They got to see it when they come to our city, for incentives, that, we make sure that we do everything we can. They got to see it in our recruitment of businesses, and I think we're doing that now. Irving is home of so many diverse companies here in Las Colinas especially. So I think ultimately it comes down to the leadership. The council is going to really make that difference.
Thank you.
Yeah, I echo what Councilman said. And another thing I would like to say is, we can say and we can talk, but actually what matters is you are actually seeing those effects in the community, in the society, and making those differences. So if we can start something small, and I personally feel that there is a lot of room for improvement, just being honest. And if there is, a Changemaker series that has been taken initiative, I feel that that should be in action as well. So we'll be more than happy to see how it goes.
Excellent. Thank you.
I think we have to remain committed. We didn't become a diverse community just by happenstance. There's been a great deal of effort put towards having Irving be as diverse as it is, through the programs we offer, through the recruitments, through the business communities that we bring to the city. So I think we have to remain committed to ensuring that diversity. And then if as a community, the things that we need to do to implement that change is, number one, we have to recruit. We have to recruit minority members into our businesses. We need to recruit minority members into our organizations. We have to be very laser focused in that. Two, we have to support those diversity efforts, and more so with our actions than just our voices. And then last and most importantly, we have to be involved. We can't just stand on the sidelines and complain about the way things are. We have to get involved. We have to be willing to get our hands dirty, to do the hard work, and to see the change that we want to see within our community.
Absolutely. And just a quick follow-up on that, Chief. One of the other questions that came in, the conversation and peaceful protest following Mr. George Floyd's murder is a moment for substantive change. Could you speak, again, just somewhat overview, and again, I think this is a great installment for another series, but specifically the question asked for specific plans, the police department and the city, Councilman Webb as well, that will bolster diversity and inclusion efforts regarding the recruitment, hiring, and training among staff. So maybe if you could just give us just some level of specificity with regard to those efforts.
Well, I don't know that we're going to change a lot that we're doing. I think we've been very intentional about recruiting a diverse workforce. Not just from a race or cultural standpoint, but from a gender standpoint. So we'll continue those efforts. I'll be interested to see what legislative changes come about either at the state or federal level that maybe relax some of the requirements that we have to fulfill in order to hire people. If any changes occur in that regard, we'll certainly be ready to take advantage of those and ensure that we continue to recruit and hire a diverse workforce.
Excellent. Councilman Webb, anything you want to briefly add in terms of just offering maybe a snapshot of specificity in terms of any efforts from the city?
Well, again, we hire the police chief, and Chief Spivey is the one who's responsible for that specifically.
Yes,
you know, I have a lot of trust that Chief Spivey will, make sure that, all of our diversity and inclusion efforts and needs are done in the police department, and that he will continue to run his police department the way he has been running it over the last year. So specifically, I'm not going to get in his business. That's his business. And, we have what's called a public safety committee, which is a committee chaired by Councilman Phil Riddle, who is also a former Irving firefighter who retired. And we have discussions like these during those committee meetings with council members. I serve on that committee too. And so, I actually contacted Phil about a couple of weeks ago and said, hey, look, here's some items that I would like for us to have as part of our public safety committee discussions when we can ever start meeting again, because of COVID-19, it's kind of hard to really meet, but he agreed, that, we want to be sensitive, to the citizens' concerns. And even though we do have a great police department, everybody in the world don't think we do.
Well,
we're not going to assume everything, assume anything, try to respond, but we're not going to have a knee-jerk reaction and just start doing things that don't need to be done. I mean, if some things are not broke, we're not going to mess with it and try to fix something that's not broke. But where there is some identifiable, needs, we will look at those seriously.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I do want to make note of two closing comments from our chat function. As a business person who is fairly active in the community, I see that the Irving Police Department makes a sincere effort to be involved in a wide range of events and activities. They take advantage of opportunities to be active and visible. They seem to be a strong effort to talk with the business community as well as our young people. I have seen firsthand that this department has a more open mind than is portrayed in the media today about most departments. And lastly, I hope that as this series of conversations continue, we make a strong effort to include the largest minority in the panel. The Hispanic community should certainly be included in all future events. I'd like to now take a moment as we close to thank our panelists, Neha Kunte, Chief Spivey, and Councilman Webb. We sincerely appreciate each of you for participating in today's program and providing candid conversation. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining our first program of our Changemaker series. Again, this is just the first of several. Our next one will be in August, so be on the lookout for that as we discuss best practices at the corporate level. Again, thank you to everyone, and on behalf of the Irving-Las Colinas 5-Star Chamber, make it a 5-star day. Thank you very much.